The earth began to soften beneath them. Spring didn't come all at once, it never does out here. It arrived in slow, careful breaths, a bit more green along the fence line, the creek running clearer, softer light falling through the barn slats at dawn. And together, without ceremony or plan, they began to move through it. He planted corn with fingers that knew how deep the seeds should go, how wide the rows should stretch. She followed without question, dropping kernels into the womb of the earth, then covering them with her palm like sealing a secret. He didn't show her how. She already knew. She tied fence wire like she'd done it for years, lifted water buckets with a rhythm that matched his. Sometimes he'd glance at her hands and wonder how many tools they'd held and how many things they'd let go. One afternoon, he paused at the door of the barn, watching her rub down one of the horses. The animal didn't flinch. She whispered to it in a tongue older than fences, older than names. That night, he knocked. Once on the barn wall and left a folded blanket on the doorframe. Didn't say anything. Didn't wait to see if she'd take it by morning. The blanket was gone. They began to share more without ever needing to speak of it. Evening chores became a quiet duet. He'd bring the feed, she'd carry the pail. She'd stoke the fire, he'd patch the hinge. She boiled water while he sharpened blades by lantern light. Sometimes their fingers brushed, passing tools or wood or a single peeled potato. And though neither drew back, neither lingered. They lived like trees growing side by side, roots tangled beneath the surface, still learning the shape of one another's shadow. One night, a storm rolled in from the west. It began with distant thunder, the kind you feel more in your chest than your ears. Then came the wind, wild, sudden, ripping through the prairie like a forgotten promise. Lightning cracked down on a dying tree at the edge of the field. Fire bloomed, not large, not yet but fast. He was already running, bucket in hand. By the time he reached the tree, she was beside him, sleeves rolled, skirts tied high, hauling water without pause. They didn't speak. There was no time, just motion, reflex, muscle, breath. They worked until the embers hissed quiet, till smoke drifted like ghosts over blackened ground. He fell to his knees, coughing. She stood still, streaking her face. And then she laughed, just once, quick, unexpected, pure. He hadn't heard laughter in years. Not real laughter. Not like that. He looked up at her, smeared hair, wild eyes shining with something. Almost alive. Something opened then. A door neither had known was closed. The next day there was no mention of it. But in the way he handed her the bucket, gentler now, in the way she brushed dirt from his sleeve before he noticed. In the way they moved closer, without moving at all, the fire had left something behind. She never spoke much of her past. But one morning, before the sun had fully risen, he found a string of beads hanging on the fence post. Carved wood, bone, one bead cracked clean down the middle. He touched them with care, not curiosity. Didn't take them down, just left them there, swaying in the wind like wind chimes with no sound. Later she came and sat near the porch, not close, not far, and in the quiet she spoke, not in order, not with names, but in pieces, like giving. Someone puzzle fragments from a life too big to fit in one telling. There was fire, she said, soldiers, a burned field, a horse with one white eye, a sister with quick hands, and a promise that had to be broken. He didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt. He just sat with her until the dusk turned blue. He didn't try to fix anything, just stayed. And sometimes, that's more sacred than any answer. But even in spring, storms still come. He had ridden to town that day, supplies again. A replacement bit. Nothing urgent. She was mending harnesses near the barn when the rider arrived, drunk, slurring. The same man who'd seen her in town weeks ago. Remembered her face, tried to take what wasn't his. She fought. She didn't scream. She struck. Hard. Precise. By the time he stumbled back onto his horse, bloodied and cursing, she stood tall in the doorway, breathing hard but unbroken. The rancher returned at dusk. He saw the scuffed ground, the broken tool, the bruise along her cheekbone. He looked at her. She waited for anger, maybe for questions, for blame, but but he just walked past her, lit the fire, poured water into the tin cup, set it beside her warm. "You're safe here," he said, "and nothing more." She didn't cry. But something inside her settled. It's like dust falling after a long ride. The days went on, and though no one would have noticed from the outside, from the rhythm of their steps, from the line of the smoke, from the sound of the gate as it clicked, shut behind them something had changed. Not love, not yet, but something slower, like a river finding its bend, like warm rain seeping into cracked earth. The wind moved like a memory across the prairie. It didn't howl. It sighed long and low through the brittle grass, across half-frozen creek beds, over a rusting fence post leaning just slightly, like it too had grown tired of standing. Morning sun hung high, but offered no warmth, just pale gold on a land that hadn't been kissed by spring in weeks. A man rode through it, alone, not fast, it's not slow, just steady, like everything he did. His coat flapped at the hem stitched, where it had torn long ago. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes that rarely met another's. He didn't speak. It's not because he couldn't, but because the world hadn't asked him to in a long time. And he'd learned not to waste words on silence. Far behind him, his ranch sat like a forgotten thought in a sea of brown. A cabin in a barn, a windmill that creaked even when still. Not a place built for joy, just survival. The kind of place that held its breath and waited for the next winter. He wasn't old, but he wasn't young anymore either. There were calluses in his soul now, thick as the ones on his hands. He moved through days like a man walking through water, not drowning, but never quite breathing. He wasn't cruel. Folks in town would have said that. He just didn't invite conversation. Didn't lean on the counter at the trading post. Didn't drink with the boys in the saloon. Didn't ask for company. Didn't offer any. His world was built on repetition. Feed the horses. Mend the fence. Check the spring. Chop the wood. Breathe. Sleep. Repeat until the day he went to town, and something in him shifted. It was a long ride to that crooked border town, dusty, bitter, with buildings too tired to stand straight. He came for supplies. Salt, flour, a new hinge for the barn door that wouldn't sit right, no matter how he hammered it. He didn't intend to stay long, but then he heard the shouting. A crowd had gathered. Not a big one. Half-interested men, few wives. 2 soldiers watching with lazy eyes. A tent had been pitched near the livestock pens, faded canvas sagging. On one side, under that tent, behind a rusted iron cage, stood a group of captives, Apache mostly. Women, a boy. One older man, whose eyes had already left his body. Their hands were bound, their hair uncombed, their faces unreadable. The auctioneer, a heavy man with sweat under his arms, was barking names and numbers, slurring vowels as though trying to forget the shape of them. Most stood with heads down, except for one. She stood still, hands tied, eyes forward. Her wrists were raw, her dress torn, but her spine was straight, like a sapling refusing to bend in the wind. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked beyond it, as if seeing a place only she remembered. No one bid. Too much risk, they said. Fight or run, or hex your cattle. The rancher didn't step forward, at least not right away, but something in him stirred. Not pity. Recognition. He didn't even know what he was doing when his boots hit the dirt. He didn't remember untying the pouch from his saddle. Didn't blink when the silver coins clinked onto the table like little thunderclaps. The auctioneer looked surprised, but greed softened his protest. She was his now, or rather, she was no longer anyone else's. They didn't speak on the way home. She rode his spare horse. He didn't offer the reins. She didn't ask. The trail was long, and the silence between them was not heavy, just there, like the air or the dust or the sky. She didn't seem afraid, just braced, like someone who stopped believing in miracles but still watches the horizon anyway. At the ranch, he showed her the barn. Offered her water, bread, a place near the stove. She said nothing, but her eyes took everything in. In the days that followed, She didn't rest. She worked without being asked. She hauled water, fed chickens, patched a tear in the roof with leftover canvas he'd forgotten about. She moved like she knew land, like she understood what it meant to make peace with hard earth. He didn't speak much, but he noticed how she paused before entering the barn, like listening for spirits noticed. How she touched the soil with her palm each morning, eyes closed, whispering something he would never ask to understand. She didn't eat with him. Not at first. She took her meals near the fire or beneath the sky, but he left food out, and she always found it. They were like two wild animals. Not fearful, just cautious. Sharing space without touching. Sharing air without words. But at night, he heard singing soft, low. Not a melody meant to entertain, but to remember. A lullaby to ghosts, maybe. Or to herself. It came through the walls like warmth. Even when the stove had gone out, and he'd lie there in bed, eyes open to the ceiling, listening to that voice move through wood and air like a prayer too old to name. She never asked why he brought her back, and he never offered, because it wasn't about debt, or justice, or charity. It was something quieter, a feeling. Like hearing your own name after forgetting it for too long. Loneliness didn't end in gunshots or thunder. It ended when someone else saw you and stayed. And though he would never have said it aloud, not then, maybe not ever, something in him knew. The wind had brought her here, and the wind never travels without reason. The earth softened more beneath them, not just the ground, but something else, something unspoken yet understood. It began with a garden. He hadn't planned on planting anything new that spring, just the usual enough to get through winter without leaning too hard on town. But one morning, she stood at the edge of the yard, fingers brushing the soil like a woman reading Braille. He watched from the porch as she knelt, touched a weed, tugged it free. Her face unreadable, her hands reverent. Later, without words, he brought out a sack of seeds. He held them in his palm and offered them to her. She didn't take them. She chose corn first, then tobacco. Then a handful of wildflower seeds, faded labels he hadn't looked at in years. She didn't ask for permission, and he didn't give it. They just began. They worked side by side beneath a low sun, knees pressed. Into dirt, sleeves rolled, the soft sound of breath and soil, the only thing between them, no talking. No teaching. Only rhythm, dig, drop, cover. The world shrank to the space between two hands passing seed. At one point, she paused and placed her palm flat on the ground. He didn't ask why. She whispered something to the dirt, words that didn't belong to his world, but felt like they should. He stood and shaded his eyes. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere deep in his chest, something moved. Not sharply, not fast, but like a door creaking open after a long winter. That night, she left a bowl at his door, clay rough at the bottom, smooth at the rim, painted with desert symbols, lightning, wind, a bird with wings outstretched. He picked it up with both hands, cradled it, not like a gift, like something alive. He didn't ask what the markings meant. He didn't need to. Later, by the fence post where the stars began to bloom, she told him. It was the story of the storm bird, how it brings fire to the land, not to destroy it, but to awaken it. How from ash, the strongest things grow. He didn't interrupt, just listened, his face turned to the night. When she finished, he reached into the saddlebag by the post, brought out an old harmonica, dented, rusted at the edges. Didn't play any more, not really. He handed it to her without ceremony. She took it gently, her thumb tracing its curve. 2 nights later, he heard music again. Wobbly at first, then clear, then full. It came from the barn-like light through cracks in old wood. He sat by the stove and listened. Eyes closed, the bowl in his lap. And when the last note faded, it didn't leave silence behind. It left space. A kind of space that invites something new. Days passed, the garden sprouted. She sang more. He spoke more. Not much. But more then. One night they sat by the fence together, backs against the rail, sky stretching like a canvas too big to name. She told him about the time she almost stopped believing in people, about a river crossing, about hands that took and took, about standing alone in the dark and deciding if this is the world, I want no part of it. He didn't reach for her. He just said, quiet as dusk, I believe you. And it was his turn. He said he'd known women, not many, not long, but none had. Stayed because he'd never asked them to. He thought silence would protect him, so that if he kept the world at a distance, it couldn't take anything away. But he'd been wrong. Silence didn't protect. It isolated. He said he didn't know how. To give someone a reason to stay. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. They sat like that for a long while, not touching, but close. The kind of closeness that carries weight. Like hands held without being held. The moon rose behind them. Coyotes cried somewhere in the hills, and neither of them moved. But something had already shifted. Two roots meeting in the soil. Later that week, the wind changed. Not the way it always did, season to season, warm to cold. This wind carried something else. A scent. A warning. He found it near the barn, written into the dirt with a boot heel. Crude words. A name scratched out, and beside it the impression of a knife blade pressed once into the ground. Like a threat drawn and sheathed again, he didn't need. To ask, the rider she'd fought had brothers, cousins, a whole mess of men who carried. Grudges like guns they never cleaned. When he showed her the mark, she didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and said she'd leave, said it plain. Not out of fear, out of something else, protection. If I go, they won't bother you. He stood still, hands on his belt buckle, eyes on the hills beyond. Then he shook his head once. This is your land now, too. And that was that. Argument. No big speech. Just the kind of truth that settles like stone in the soul. She didn't leave. Instead, she brought the Stormbird bowl into the house and placed it on the mantel, and together they waited, not for trouble, but for the next. Root to crack the stone. It began with the dust. Late dusk. It's the kind of sky that blurs color with memory. He was fixing the gate again, not because it needed it, but because the quiet suited him. Was on the porch, humming a tune without words. A bowl sat in her lap, a pattern of rising suns etched into its rim, her hands tracing it, over and over. Then came the riders, 4 of them, lean, sunburnt, wrong in the saddle, like they'd crawled out of some scorched past. Dust coiled around their boots when they dismounted. One stepped forward. Thin face, tight eyes. He said her name, not the one she used now, but the one she'd buried under a year of wind, work, and kindness. Come on out, he barked. Time to pay what's owed. She didn't flinch, didn't stand either. Just looked at him, steady. The man's lips curled. Did you think we'd forget? He reached into his coat, pulled out a bottle with a ragneck. Lit it. Threw it. The fire broke across the porch like an accusation. The rancher didn't run. He stepped forward, picked up the shovel he'd been using. Not raised it, just held it in both hands like a staff. His silence was heavier than any weapon. Behind him, she rose, came to stand beside him, empty hands, loose at her sides. The flames crackled behind them. Her eyes never left the men. No shouting, no pleading, just wind. The lead man spat. You gonna stand there, old man? Die for her? Before the rancher could speak, sound rose from behind the ridge. Hooves, lanterns, one by one. Shapes emerged, not fast, not loud, just steady. Townsfolk, neighbors, faces lit by quiet conviction, a dozen riders, guns in holsters, but not drawn. One man had a hammer, another a rake. The preacher held a book, but his eyes didn't blink. Someone had told them. Maybe it was the boy she'd helped bury his dog. Or the widow who got a warm bowl of stew on a lonely night. Or the ranch hand who found work without being asked too many questions. Kindness doesn't echo at roots. The 4 men looked around. daring each other to move. None did. The one who'd thrown the fire stepped back, eyes narrowing. Ain't worth it. Another muttered, this place ain't right no more. And like ghosts that lost their reason for haunting, they mounted up, rode out. She exhaled.
Ow. Ow.
He didn't. Not yet. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did the townsfolk dismount. Someone stamped out the last of the fire. A woman handed the rancher a tin cup of water. No one said a word. They didn't have to. Later that night, they sat on the steps, new blanket wrapped around their shoulders. Touched. The scorched spot on the porch already scrubbed clean. Thought I'd have to run again, she whispered. You didn't. He turned to her, not with a smile. He wasn't the smiling kind, but with a look that said, I knew you wouldn't. They could have. Fought. They didn't. She stared into the stars, wide and silent above the ranch. Why? Because they're used to being feared, he said simply. And tonight they were. Seen, she thought about that, about how much of her life had been spent hiding. The fight never came, but it changed everything. Even the wind felt different, not watching, not warning, just passing through. Spring came like an apology. The field, once dry, bone-hard, now bloomed and soft. Greens, shoots of barley, wildflowers. A sapling stretched beside the barn, roots tangled with memory and hope. The ranch changed, subtly. Children from the nearby settlements began arriving, muddy boots, eager eyes. She taught them how to weave baskets, how to shape stories from silence. Each tale ended with laughter, sometimes tears. But always, always, a seed of something better. He built benches out front. Not for profit, there was no sign that said welcome, but the doors never stayed closed. A mother with a black eye came once, holding her baby like a shield. She left 2 months later. With a new scar and a new name. He never asked their stories, showed them where the fence line was, where the water ran sweetest. And some nights, when the work was done and the stars stretched like old songs, he played his harmonica. Not melodies, just wandering notes. Unsure of what they wanted to be, she'd hum along sometimes, not matching, just companioning. One day the preacher came by, not with a Bible, but with nails. He helped fix the roof, sat for stew. Before he left, he said, You've made something holy here. They didn't respond. But after he left, she carved a new mark into the bowl, a line with a flame above it. It meant remembered. Years passed. The sky didn't change much. Still wide, still watching, but the ranch, it grew. One morning a girl arrived, not young, not old. Her face was tight with whatever road she'd come from. She asked nothing. They offered tea. She stayed the night. Then 2, then longer. And eventually, she took her turn teaching the younger ones how to dye cloth from berries. Her laugh was brittle, then soft, then full. Time went on. The rancher's hair turned silver, then wind. Woman still hummed. One day a voice aged, crackling like old parchment, spoke softly from the porch. Sometimes the wind doesn't bring storms, it said. Sometimes it brings souls meant to rest beside yours. It's not to rescue you, but to remind you that even the loneliest ground remembers how to bloom. Girl turned. Who said that? The older woman just smiled. Someone who knew. The sun rose behind them, gold spilling over fields like a benediction. He was mending the fence, slow but steady. She was shelling peas, humming that wordless tune. The porch held their marks, burned scars, carved patterns, echoes of feet. And the sky, always waiting, looked down on it all. Not in judgment, but in peace. Fade to morning. A breeze lifts petals from the wildflowers. Hand rests on another's rough, weathered, warm. No more running, no more hiding, just this, earned, remembered.